All right, we're live after a little bit of delay. There was some problem with the LinkedIn settings. So, this is session number 15 of Understanding Anger 2.0, and we are going to be finishing up with our examination of the Stoics on anger, which we've spent a lot of time on over the last several months, going through Seneca's work on anger. And this time around, we're going to be looking at Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, both of whom are major Stoic philosophers, just as important as Seneca, but they didn't write quite as much as Seneca did, since he wrote an entire book, which is called on anger. So, in the case of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, who are both coming after Seneca, by the way, Epictetus is kind of a contemporary of Seneca, but an old Seneca, a young Epictetus, and then Marcus Aurelius is coming much later. They both have a lot of really helpful ideas and insights and even practices, but they're scattered throughout their work. So, in the case of Epictetus, we have two main books. We have the Enchiridion, which is a very short book that I think a lot of people are very familiar with, and that is produced from the much longer discourses. Actually, neither one is by Epictetus, but they reflect Epictetus's teachings, because both of them are by this guy Arrian, who studied with Epictetus. So he's the one who took the discourses and took a few sections of them and condensed them and made the Enchiridion. And we're not really going to be looking at the Enchiridion. We're going to be looking at the longer discourses and what they have to say. And then with Marcus Aurelius, the official title of his work is To Himself, but it's often called the Meditations. That's typically how it's the title's translated in English. And so I think people are quite familiar with that. So there's not a lot of background stuff I think we need to go into. And I figured we would jump into Epictetus first and then finish up with Marcus Aurelius. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. You can write whatever you want to in the comments, and we'll just pick it up from there. So Epictetus, actually, let's back up a little bit. The Stoics' idea about anger is that, by contrast to most other ancient philosophers, so Platonists, Aristotelians, Epicureans, anger is always going to be bad. It's going to be problematic. The question is not whether you can have good anger or not, as is a question in these other schools, but simply how bad is the anger? And then, there's other questions that are important to ask as well, like, well, why do we get angry? What causes it? And what can we do once we actually are angry? And I do want to highlight one big difference. If you've got your idea of the emotions from Seneca, you might be a little bit misled about the Stoics and what it is that they think, because Seneca has this sort of three-step model of emotion where first you feel the bite or the sting or the initial impulse, and that's not yet the emotion. And then there's a second period where you can actually do something about it. You can assent to it, not assent to it, because emotions include not just feelings, but also ideas. And at that point, you have some measure of control. And then once you allow yourself to start like feeling and responding through that emotion, it's out of your control. So he talks about it as like stepping off a cliff, until you actually step off the cliff. And while you're stepping off the cliff, you could not step off the cliff. Once you do, you're going all the way down. So Seneca understands anger as working like that. Once somebody actually is angry, there's really not much that you can do with them as far as like getting them to not be angry. He's not entirely consistent about this. It's very clear with Epictetus in particular, but also with Marcus Aurelius, that they don't buy that they do think that you can It's difficult to do, but you can talk with somebody who is angry, including yourself, and try to move them from feeling that emotion very strongly to maybe feeling it less strongly, having some measure of rationality and choice, some responsibility. And so that's an important difference. So let's talk about Epictetus. His general idea is that it doesn't do us any good to get angry with people. And when we do get angry, which we do, some of us quite frequently, it's because we're mistaken about some things. And it could be about what the Stoics call appearances or impressions, what's actually going on. It could be about external matters. And generally, it also means a shifting of awareness from what is really in our control, namely our faculty of choice, our proiresis in ancient Greek, and keeping that in accordance with our human nature and the nature of the universe. He also is going to tell us, and this is kind of a useful metaphor, that when we allow ourselves to get angry, we are behaving not really like human beings, but like other kinds of animals, specifically beasts of prey. So Epictetus likes to say, if you're giving in to gluttony or lust or stuff like that, you're like a herd animal, like a sheep or something along those lines. If you're giving into anger or rivalry or these other things, then you're more like a wolf or a lion or a snake or some other animal that's actually kind of noxious. And so you're losing a bit of your humanity by allowing yourself to give in to anger. And he goes on and he does a couple things that I think are really quite helpful for us. So he's interested in particular in the motivation and the decision that's involved on the part of the person that we get angry with, right? And this could also involve people getting angry with each other. And then he's also focused on when we respond in anger, what are we actually thinking is happening? So he talks about how we get angry at people for doing things. They maybe insult us or humiliate us, or they leave us out of something, or they do something that hinders us or hurts us, or somebody close to us. And Epictetus says, well, you can think about, why do people do the things that they actually do? And, it's because they think that that's a good and proper thing for them to do. And often mistaken. People get these sorts of things wrong all the time. So somebody, for example, a clerk who is handling your paperwork and they're not paying attention and they fill things in wrong and it's going to create problems for you, or maybe they're even doing it maliciously. Why are they doing it? Well, because that's what they think is actually a good idea. And it turns out that it's not really a good idea. So, that can be an issue. And, we can say, well, they should know better, but in fact, they don't, at least not at that time. So, what are we going to do with them? We can get angry with them. That's one possibility for ourselves. And if we judge that they're just being jerks, they're, bad people, it's very easy for us to get quite angry with them. But there's other possibilities as well. So we can remind ourselves that if a person has mistaken conceptions of what's right or wrong, or what is advantageous or harmful, what's befitting or unbefitting, or what's true or false, they're going to act on those mistaken conceptions because it seems reasonable to them. So we can reinterpret why they're doing what they're doing. And now there is some potential here for condoning exploitation and abuse, and we can talk about that in a bit. So he gives you three examples. Thieves, why do thieves steal things? Well, because it seems to them good and reasonable to do that. Maybe they have a beef with the person they're stealing from. Maybe their idea about how human beings ought to treat each other is that we ought to steal from each other. And, that's mistaken. Robbers are people who use violence against other people to take their possessions because, again, that seems good and reasonable for them to do. He brings up adulterers, people who cheat in their sexual relationships. Why do they do that? Because it seems reasonable and good for them to do that. So, what should we do in those cases? How should we approach them? Epictetus says, well, you can get angry at them and you can hate them and think that they're an idiot and, react to them in a very angry way. Or we can say that, they're unfortunately acting under incorrect beliefs and erroneous reasoning. And he says it really actually doesn't make sense to get angry at people who are mistaken and foolish. If you want to have an emotional reaction, he says, a more befitting reaction would be feeling a sense of what we translate as pity, elein in Greek. That's the verb for it. We could also translate it as compassion. And it could be the kind of compassion where you're like, oh, you poor bastard, so benighted in your ideas and attitudes about things. I guess you can't help doing stupid things, right? And so, he's got a passage in the Discourses where he says, pity them, drop this readiness to be offended and to hate, and these words which the many say, those accursed and odious people, are you actually so wise? Why are you so peevish? Why are you angry? Is it because we value so much the things of which these people rob us? If we actually have the right attitude, we're not going to be so affected by this. And he says, so long as you're valuing these things, be angry with yourself rather than with the thief and the adulterer. And he also brings up the case of Medea, who you may know from Greek legends and mythology. So Medea ends up killing her own children that she's had with Jason in order to get back at him. There's other reasons as well in Euripides' play. And Epictetus says, why are you getting angry with this fictional character for doing something bad? She actually thinks wrongly that this is the right thing to do. And she actually has a noble and spirited soul that's gone wrong. She's not totally bad. She's just got things mixed up. And so, to bring this to a close, once we realize and remind ourselves that other people act according to their reasoning, their understanding of basic moral preconceptions, their sense impressions or appearances, he says we won't become angry with them, we won't blame them, we won't take offense, we won't revile, and we won't hate. So that's an important aspect there. Any questions about that before I go on to talk about this presumption of offense that we often have? Any reactions? I mean, it does have some potential, if understood in the wrong way, for being too passive and saying, oh, let people do whatever they want. That is a legitimate concern, although I don't think a damning criticism of the Stoic position, because I think the Stoics do have a proper response to that. Not seeing any comments or questions. So I think I'll just go on. And if you have any, you can, of course, leave them in the comments and I'll address them either as they come up or when we hit another Q&A pause. Oh, here we go. So here's one from Real Guy Machine. It sounds to me like reframing it as sadness for how deeply misled someone is instead of angry. Do you think that's a good way to interpret it? Epictetus doesn't use terms for sadness or grief. He uses instead the term pity, right? Um, Now, what is pity? It is a pain, which, could be sadness at what is happening to another person, right? So if I find out that my child is being bullied at school, instead of just getting angry, I could feel compassion for them. And I guess that could involve a kind of sadness, although it doesn't always frame itself as sadness. And sadness is distinguishable from pity or compassion. So I would say that it's in the neighborhood, but not exactly the same thing. Here's another comment from MS. I wish I were not so angry. Okay, well, that's something you can work on. And ancient philosophy has a lot of very useful resources for understanding and managing and lessening anger. This is part of why I've got this series that I'm doing, in part, which isn't just going to be ancient philosophy, medieval philosophy, early modern philosophy, a lot of good stuff in all of those. But I mean, the Platonists, the Aristotelians, the Epicureans, the Stoics, they all knew that this was a big issue. And so there's tons and tons of often untapped resources that we can make use of, like those that we're going to talk about in the rest of this session with Epictetus and then Marcus Aurelius. So that might help. Now, Philosopheric has a interesting comment here. Sometimes I wish I were less stoic. You're probably not stoic in the real sense if you're wishing you were less so. You're stoic in the what we could call it misunderstanding sense, right? We often distinguish between Stoicism, capital S, which is the actual philosophy, which can be incredibly helpful for people. And Stoicism, you notice that you've written it with a lowercase s, which is just a characteristic, a trait of personality, which often doesn't serve us. Being stoic in a real sense, the uppercase S sense, doesn't mean not having emotions at all. It doesn't mean shoving them down inside and never expressing them. It means actually understanding what makes you tick and then deciding for yourself what you want to do with your emotions, right? So, if what you mean by being stoic means like stiff upper lip, that's probably not going to serve you well. If you're talking about Stoic philosophy, then it wouldn't make sense to wish to be less stoic because it's so helpful for people. All right, so let's go on and talk about another key thing that Epictetus is giving us. So he talks about how when we get angry, we are presuming that the other person is offending us in some way. Aristotle would use the term slighting. And so we take things as being offenses against us and as being reasonable occasions for getting angry. And Epictetus says, when that happens, that is probably because you're on some level getting things wrong. You're mistaken about things. And so you can look at that. If you want to be less angry, you can look at your own assumptions that are going into that. And one of the big things that he points out. So, if you know your ancient Stoic philosophy, particularly Epictetus, there is a distinction between what's in our control or what's in our power, up to us, quite literally, epimein, and what is not. And a lot of the things that we get angry about in the present and back in ancient times are things that we don't actually have control over, but we want to have control over. We want things to go differently than they did or are going to go, right? So, he says that we get angry because we think that the other person has in some way harmed us, right? They did something bad to us. And Epictetus points out a couple things. He says, listen, things that aren't in your power can't really be affected by other people and their actions. I mean, now, is he right about that? Obviously, they can be to some degree, but if something doesn't really belong to you in the first place, you're not being robbed of it. And he says that these are the matters in which actions of others have the potential to make us angry, but only if we actually think that we ourselves are being affected negatively by those things. So Epictetus, has a case where a thief breaks in and steals his nice lamp. And a lamp is a useful thing for somebody who's reading scrolls at night, right? He's a teacher. And he says, well, I can just get myself a cheap lamp, right? And if they want to steal that, then I'm not losing out anything. It's not that big of a deal, right? And now some of us may have more trouble with this one. When an adulterer seduces our spouse, we get angry with the adulterer, he says, if we view our spouse and their affection as something in our power, as something that's ours. But if we view it as something that's outside of our power, it's kind of funny too, because a lot of people get angry at the seducer, not so much at the spouse, right? You could say, what the hell's going on with that spouse of mine that they've transferred their affection from me to another person? But, we can look at these sorts of things and say, we don't have to view them in that way. And then we don't have to get angry. And you can't, of course, just do this with no preparation whatsoever in a situation where you characteristically get angry. This is a practice that you have to use. And so this brings us to another really key point about Epictetus. So he thinks that habit is incredibly important, and anger tends to emerge from a matrix of habits. So we're not just like blank slates who just get angry in a new situation and there's nothing in the past influencing it, right? A lot of our assumptions are based on our past experience and the lenses that we bring to them. Some of us, myself included, in childhood and adolescence and teenage years, developed bad habits when it came to anger, getting angry too easily over the wrong things, using it as a way to, try to get things done or keep people at a distance. And if that's the case, we have to undo that habit. And undoing a habit that has to do with emotions is often like pulling at a very complicated knot. It's not as simple as getting yourself a transform yourself in 30 days workbook or something like that. You got to figure out why you're actually getting angry about the things that you're getting angry. And you have to exercise some self-control so that if you do in fact get angry, you don't like lash out and screw things up or anything like that. And that can be kind of challenging, right? So Epictetus says, when you're angry, you may be sure not merely that this evil, getting angry, has befallen you, but you've strengthened the habit and have, as it were, added fuel to the flame. So every time that you do get angry, now this is like the stuff that we were talking about earlier. Seneca says once you're actually angry, you can't reason with yourself. This is something that Epictetus is showing us. You can reason with yourself. You're getting angry, and you realize that it's just like the other times you got angry, and you're like, oh man, do I want to reinforce the habit and make it easier for me to get angry next time, or do I want to try to work on this? I may not be totally successful, but I can at least resist it to some degree and think about what's going on, use techniques like count to 10, go take a walk, don't think about what you're all ticked off about. These are things that you can do. So he's got another passage where he says, if you don't want to be hot-tempered, don't feed your habit. Set before it nothing on which it can grow. So, I mean, if you find yourself getting into a rage because you're scrolling through social media and seeing all sorts of stuff about people that tick you off, maybe don't scroll through social media so much, right? If you go to the gym and people tick you off there because they don't wipe down the equipment properly, and there's always going to be some jackass who's not wiping down the equipment at all. Well, you either got to figure out how to be okay with that and just wipe it off because it's not a big deal, or don't go to the gym for a while, right? Until you get your anger under control. So he suggests, as the first step, here's what you got to do: keep quiet and count the days during which you haven't been angry. Now, if you do that, if you actually pay attention to it and you're a kind of choleric person, you're probably not going to make more than a couple days, are you? He says, if you go as much as 30 days without a fit of anger, sacrifice to God. Why? Because your life has changed so much for the better. 30 days, that's pretty tough. I mean, do I make it a week? Sometimes, but not always, and I've been trying to do this sort of stuff for years. So there's one other thing that I think could be helpful in terms of Epictetus. He talks a lot in his works about understanding the prices of things. So what are we exchanging for what, right? And we can think about this in terms of anger. So what is it that we actually want? Do we want to have a million different things and everybody obey us and listen to us? I mean, if you want that, you're going to be ticked off a lot of the time because it's not going to happen. If, on the other hand, what you want to do is to develop, good traits of character like wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage, if you want to be, tranquil and not suffer a lot of negative emotions in your life, that's feasible. You can do that. And you have to decide when you get into a situation, do I want to get angry and indulge the anger, or do I want to have this, something better on the other hand? You can also do that in terms of relationships, right? So he's got this interesting passage where somebody comes to him and says, hey, my brother's mad at me and he won't reconcile with me. And Epictetus says, I can't change your brother's mind, and you can't either. So what, you want to get angry at him? That's up to you. You can decide what you want to do with that. And likewise, when we're on the other end, we're getting mad at people that we're involved with, we can say, do I want to be mad at them and then, indulge in the kinds of things that angry people do? Or should I instead, say, listen, this is the price, as he says, this is the price of peace of mind. Somebody spills a little bit of oil or wine. Do I get mad at them as a result of that? Or do I say, hey, man, these things happen? So think about this now in terms of going to a restaurant, right? You go to a restaurant. It was just Valentine's Day, so let's use that as a scenario, right? You made a date with somebody. You got your eye on them. You think that they like you. You get a reservation for a fancy restaurant. You go there. It's Valentine's Day, so the place is going to be messed up, and their expectations are through the roof. There's going to be things going wrong with your meal. They bring out something good to eat and it's not as good as you expected. Are you going to let that ruin your night? Are you going to get mad at that waiter and be like, this is crap, Or do you want to just have a good time with the person that you're out with? I mean, you would have been smarter to stay in and cook a meal rather than going out on the date night of the year, but you've already done that. You've chose to go on the date night. Do you want to make it good for you and that person? Or would you rather indulge in yelling at the waiter and probably your date getting, being like, well, this is a red flag, right? So that's a good thing to keep in mind. All right. So got some comments here already. This is a good place to take a little pause for addressing those and any other questions that you got. And then we're going to go on to Marcus Aurelius. So Sigma says, are there any benefits of being angry sometimes without any reason? So the Stoics would say there's no benefits of being angry, period. Right. So it's trivially false. That's a non-starter just by asking, are there any benefits of being angry? Now, does that mean that you should never appear angry? Seneca actually talks about like a judge needing to pretend to be angry to like get the criminal to stop acting badly, but that's not the same thing as feeling anger. And if you're getting angry for no reason, I mean, even the philosophers like the Platonists, the Aristotelians, and the Epicureans, who think that there can be some positive benefits to being angry, would say that if you're angry for no reason, that's stupid. I mean, anger is not a just neutral thing that is like a tool or something. It's dangerous. Even Aristotle, who's probably the most optimistic about using anger, even he will say, man, you got to be really, really careful with it. So if you're getting angry for no reason, I mean, you're never angry for no reason actually from any of these perspectives. There's always something going on in the background that maybe you're not aware of, a habit, an assumption, a judgment that you're making, but you probably want to look at that, right? Let's see here. Home for your money, interesting, anger is like a cliff. So that's Seneca's metaphor, not Epictetus, not Marcus Aurelius. The Stoics aren't always on exactly the same page. Bianca says, anger isn't an emotion I feel very often. Well, then that's great from a Stoic perspective. I mean, ideally, we wouldn't feel it at all. And we'd just feel good emotions like joy and love and stuff like that. But I mean, we live in a real world and we're not Stoic sages. So we're bound to get angry at some points in time. If you're angry less, that's a good thing. Don says, I'm new to philosophy. I don't know how to get started in Stoic texts. How can I get started? So you can like Google it. I have a piece on Stoic reading recommendations in my Substack, and I like go through it. Here's the 3 I suggest starting with. Here's where you go next. Here's where you can go after that. So just, put into Google Gregory Sadler Stoic reading recommendations Substack, so it doesn't take you to the Medium post, which is behind a paywall, and you can get a whole bunch of those. Bianca says, sure, but I'm not an angry person, I guess. Yeah, I mean, different people have different temperaments, right? I am, and so is my wife, what you would call irascible people. So both of us, I think, temperamentally tend towards getting angry as a response, which makes us great in certain kinds of situations and not so great in others. Like, if we have a fight, we can really have a fight, right? But it's something that you definitely, whether you're a Stoic or not, you definitely don't want to have uncontrolled anger, right? That's a big problem. So if you're not an angry person, that's awesome. You have a leg up on those who are angry people. And maybe some of this is less important for you than for others. So any other questions, comments before I lead us into Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic emperor? All right, so here's a comment from Philosopheric. It seems to me most anger comes from feeling powerless or ineffective in a situation. I wouldn't go that far. There's a lot of different causes for anger, and it's not just, you could say that feeling powerless or ineffective could be an aspect of it, but we get angry because we ascribe intention and agency to the things that are getting us angry, and a certain kind of damage or vulnerability to ourselves or others, or even things that we feel like we have to stick up for by getting angry. Anger is a very complex emotion, and we don't want to try to like reduce it down to one thing. So all right, let's talk about Marcus Aurelius. So this is actually, many of you are familiar with this quote, Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I'm going to meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All of these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what's actually good and evil. But I, who've seen the nature of the good, that it is beautiful, and of the bad, that it's ugly, and the nature of the person who does wrong, that they are akin to me, not of the same blood or seed, but participating in the same intelligence and same portion of the divinity. I can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can fix on me what is ugly, nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him. So this is something he is saying, this is a practice. Do this every morning. And you notice that he's not afraid to call a spade, as we have in that expression, right? He doesn't say, well, there's a lot of people that are misguided. I shouldn't call them by any names. That would be mean of me. He's like, there's a lot of people who are busybodies, they're Bodinskis. There's a lot of people who are ungrateful and they're jerks. There's people who are arrogant. There's people who are deceptive. There's people who are envious, right? And these are all varieties of different kinds of jerks. And that's reality. You're going to meet with jerks. If we ever, like sometimes people will get a job and they're like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Unlike every other situation I've ever been in, everybody here's cool and they're all going to like get along together. And then, a couple weeks in, people are fighting with each other and you're like, oh, this is bad, right? Well, why would you think that people are going to not be like people, or you get involved in a romantic relationship. Ooh, we're so good and so compatible. We'll never fight. Well, then you have a fight, right? And oftentimes when you have a fight, you fight about what you're even fighting about, right? So it's like a meta fight going on. And so what you can do is apply this reasoning here. You can say, listen, they can't really make me into a bad person. Only I can do that. And they are also a human being like me. They're just messed up, By the way, I'm messed up too. And so I don't have to get angry with them. I don't have to hate them. I can remind myself that they're like me. He's got another passage that I really like. And actually, with me, it's not people's armpits so much. So he says, are you angry with somebody whose armpits stink? Are you angry with somebody whose mouth smells foul? What good will this anger do you? Now, for me, it's not so much stinky people in those senses. It's actually people who put on too much cologne or perfume, maybe to cover up their stink, right? If, we get these guys and women where like they come in and they get in the elevator with you and you're like, oh man, that is a lot. What the hell's going on here? My eyes are watering, I'm getting sinus congestion because of you. I've actually sometimes had to tell students, hey, you can't wear so much cologne when you come to class because you're making my eyes water and you're giving me a headache, right? So we could get angry with somebody because of that, or our neighbors playing their music too loud next to us, right? So here's what Marcus says. What good will this anger do you? This person has this kind of mouth. They have this kind of armpit. It's necessary that an emanation, a stink, should come from these things. And then he says, but the man has reason and he's able, if he takes pain, to discover where he offends. And okay, that's true, right? Somebody should probably talk to them and say, hey, buddy, you're stinking up the place. So Marcus says, great. You have a rational faculty. Apply it to their rational faculty. Show them their error, admonish them. If they listen, then you don't have a problem anymore. So you don't have to get angry at them. It's actually counterproductive for you to get angry with them. You're just getting yourself riled up, and they probably will be less inclined to listen to you if you're yelling at them about how stinky they are, right? So we could use this for anything else. People who, I don't know, say the wrong thing in company, they're swearing all the time or using other language that people don't like, dressing in crazy ways. You know, it doesn't mean that you can't say, "Hey, this isn't appropriate," but you don't need to get angry to do that, right? Another thing that Marcus brings up, and this is a really famous part of the meditations, and this is a little bit longer, right? He says, "I've got 9 brief prescriptions for you." Now, he actually doesn't have 9, he's got closer to 12 by my reckoning. And he says that keep these 9 points in mind, like gifts from the 9 muses, which is probably why he picked the number 9, and start becoming a human being now and for the rest of your life. Now, who is he saying this to? He's not saying it to you or me, because the book isn't written for us. We're benefiting by reading it. He's saying this to himself as a man in his 60s who's saying, man, get your life together. You're the Roman emperor, right? You got to, you're 60 something years old. Try not to be such an angry fool. So here's these considerations. The first one, he says, my relationship to them. What is the connection between human beings? He says that, I can look at it that we came into the world for the sake of one another, not to compete with each other, not to like make each other miserable, but to actually help them out. And then he says, here's the second one. In my case, I actually came into it apparently to be their guardian. I'm in a leadership position and I've got responsibility. So I can't afford to get angry with them. The third consideration, if they're actually right in what they're doing, then you don't have any right to complain. And if they aren't, then they do it involuntarily, out of ignorance. Now, what would be a great example of this? So you want to get somewhere and you're driving and it turns out that there's a lot of traffic and you're stuck in that traffic. And why is that? Well, because somebody had an accident and the road is blocked, reduced down to one lane up ahead, and the police are waving people through, and you just got to take the extra time. Or everybody wants to get to the same place as everybody else. Here in Milwaukee, one of our choke points is when you go past what used to be called County Stadium or Brewers Stadium. Now it's called AmFam Field, but nobody around here actually calls it that. You get into a choke point, or there's road construction, right? If they're right in doing that, if the police are right in reducing things down to one lane so they can clean up the road, or the road construction people are doing their jobs, why are you getting mad at them, right? I know they're inconveniencing you, but you don't have to be you don't have to get upset about that. Number 4 is really, I think, very helpful, or at least certainly I find it helpful. He says, you've made enough mistakes yourself. You're just like them. Even if there's some that you've avoided, you have the potential to have made the same mistakes, even if cowardice keeps them from you, or fear of what people would say, or some equally bad reason. So, it's a nice way of looking in the mirror and saying, listen, buddy, you think you're better than everybody else? You're actually not. So, why are you getting angry at them for stuff that you either do or would do, right? The fifth one, number 5, you don't know for sure it's a mistake. A lot of things are means to some other end. You have to know an awful lot before you can judge other people's actions with real understanding, right? So you get into a situation and people are doing things and they're pissing you off and you're like, well, why are you doing this, right? And if you actually inquired into it, you'd find out there's some good reasons why they're doing it. Another great one, and by the way, this is one that Seneca brings up at the very end of On Anger. When you lose your temper or even feel irritated, remind yourself that human life is very short. Before long, all of us will be laid out side by side. Do you really want to spend your time on being angry with people? It's a choice. What do you want to devote your time to? Number 7, it's not what they do that bothers us. That's a problem for their mind, not ours. It's our own misperceptions. So we can discard those. We can give up thinking that this thing is a catastrophe, and then we're not going to be so bothered by it. And how do you do that? By recognizing that things are not as bad as it seems to you. So somebody, says something mean about you on social media, you could just, like, if it's on your page or something, you could remove the comment. And, if you don't like them, you can block them, because you're probably not going to have any useful conversations with people who are foolish. And you don't owe anybody a conversation, but you don't have to let it make you mad and, like, hit the keyboard as you're removing their comment, or respond to them. You're a jackass, or something like that. Right. The eighth, how much more damage anger does than things that cause anger. Our getting angry at things is bad for us from the Stoic perspective, right? It doesn't help us out. Number 9 is kind of cool. Kindness is invincible, provided it's sincere, not being ironic or an act, not put on. And he says, what can the most vicious person do if you keep treating them with kindness and gently set them straight, correcting them cheerfully at the exact moment they're trying to do you harm? Sometimes they get embarrassed. Sometimes they'll just stop, because they're usually, if they're actually trying to do something that they think is bad to you, they're trying to get some sort of, response from you, right? And that's not as easy for them to sustain when you're actually like, oh, well, I'm glad you're here, you know. Now, will that work in every case? Would that work with Attila the Hun or Hitler or Genghis Khan? Probably not, right? But it does work with a lot of people, surprisingly. And then he's going to he's given us the 9, right? And then he says, well, here's some more. Along with not getting angry with others, don't try to pander either. Both are forms of selfishness. So that's, another thing. And then here's another one. And now this is framed in gender terms, but we could extend it to everybody. When you start to lose your temper, remember, there's nothing manly about rage. It's courtesy and kindness that define a human being and a man, not, that's who possesses strength and nerves and guts, not angry whiners. People who are like always flying off the handle, the so-called alpha males and stuff like that, they're actually wimps. They can't deal with basic things, right? So, and then he finally says, and one more thought from Apollo. Now, here's a good one. To expect bad people who have bad characters, not to injure others is crazy. That's to ask the impossible. And to let them behave like that to other people, but expect them to exempt you, is arrogant. You're being foolish, right? So if you know that somebody is always selfish and belittling other people, why would you expect them not to do that to you? Right? It's kind of silly. You think you're somehow an exception to everything, right? So those are some good considerations. Let's take a few before we go on with some more Marcus things. Let's take a few of these comments. So Global says, technically anger is an emotion. Not even technically, it is an emotion. It's one of the many emotions. And yes, happiness is an emotion. I don't think anybody didn't think that anger is an emotion. So I'm not sure why that's coming up. Global also says anger is a good way to learn how to eat crow. Tastes better when fresh. Yeah, I mean, the things that we do when we're angry, we're often embarrassed about afterwards. And, that's at least if we're, not incorrigible. I mean, some people never think they do anything wrong, right? MS says that's the one I try to think about when I get angry. I'm not sure which one it is, but all of these are very useful. Global says I get myself anger after getting angry, mad at myself for not solving anything. Now, that's an interesting point, right? Because Epictetus just said, hey, if you're going to get angry at yourself, right? And there is a long-standing tradition among people like the Stoics and certain Christian authors like John Cassian, for example, who says no anger is good, making one exception and saying, anger at yourself for getting angry, for having that vice, falling into it, that could actually be useful. It's better not to feel it altogether, but that can actually be somewhat helpful. Now there's a little bit of talk about sigma, male, alpha by design. That's all bullshit, by the way. First off, that was based on studies of captive wolves that were sort of extrapolations onto them, and then it made its way into the manosphere, where a lot of loser men wanted to think of themselves as, I'm an alpha, right? I mean, anybody who, I'll say this, if we actually have the classification where like alphas are at the top, and then you got betas, and then you got lower stuff, everybody who thinks they're an alpha is at least a beta. Sigma males are also betas. They're all betas. The best thing is just put that stupid way of classifying things aside, because it's not going to serve you for anything. Pop Killer, didn't Apollo flay someone alive for losing a music contest on speaking of the matter of temperance? So the music contest was not on temperance. The music contest was just a music contest. Yeah, that's in ancient Greek mythology, but I'm not sure why that's relevant here. The Stoics are not saying, well, God did it, so it's okay. I mean, actually, here's a good thing to keep in mind. The Stoics would say, well, that was bullshit. Poets made that up. The gods don't do that sort of thing, right? So, and this is, the consistent Stoic viewpoint on things. Plato, by the way, also has a similar viewpoint. The gods, the poets make up all sorts of crazy stories about the gods, but that's all bullshit for popular consumption. The real gods are good, so they're not flaying people, or anything like that. Let's see. One cannot define someone by soft attitude or a hard edge. I think we probably want to get away from like conjectures about environment and crap like that. So global, I would just like leave that right now. This is a complete distraction, and you're making very dogmatic claims that can't actually be backed up. So that's not helpful for a philosophical conversation. So I would leave that off at this point. Now notice what I did there, right? Exactly what Marcus Aurelius is suggesting. Somebody's doing something that's, not really appropriate for a situation. And instead of getting angry about it, we say, this isn't helpful. And now it's up to people to decide what they want to do. So let's put aside any alpha, beta, blah, 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 blah. And let's get back to actually talking about Stoicism. Shall we do that? Yeah. So Bianca's got the right point of view here. So what else does Marcus have to say about this stuff? So, the Stoics think of us human beings, as being part of a cosmos, a world, right? And, what happens when we're getting angry? So he tells us when we get angry, we're turning away from reason, which is what separates us from the other animals, at least for the Stoics, really most of the ancient philosophers. And we're kind of throwing away our greatest advantage when we allow ourselves to get angry. He also says that the soul of a person who gets angry does violence to itself. It becomes like a tumor, like a separate growth. It's, instead of being part of a community or a whole, it's trying to do its own thing. And if you think about what cancer does, we understand the nature of cancer much better now. I mean, they knew about it in ancient times. That's where we got the word from, conquer, right? Cancer cells reproduce themselves to the detriment of the other cells that are part of an organism. So we're doing damage to ourselves when we allow ourselves to get angry and trying to injure another person in our anger. So that's that can be useful. And again, he's saying this to himself because he is liable to get angry. Another thing that we can do coming back to this theme of, listen, people are doing dumb stuff, sometimes bad stuff, but why are they doing it? Because on some level, they're mixed up about things. He says you can remind yourself that no soul wants to be robbed of truth and justice and temperance and kindness. So you can be gentler with them instead of getting angry with them. And here's some examples. A person who's sick will find honey tasting bitter. People who have rabies, who are going to die, unfortunately, are terrified of water. And children, value all sorts of stupid things, like a ball, for example. Why does that upset you? He says. Do you think that, falsehood is less powerful than bile or a rabid dog? He also says, when people do things that are trying to interfere with you, hinder you, insult you, ask yourself, what did they think was going to result? What are they trying to achieve? And if you can understand that, you can feel sympathy or pity for them rather than anger, right? And maybe you have to help them. Maybe you have to give them some guidance, particularly if you're in a leadership position. Instead of your subordinates do something wrong, and you're like, "You idiots! I can't believe it." That's not a great way to motivate people to start doing things right. You sit down with them, right? And then, he talks about thinking about your own screw ups. So, he's got a practice for you. When you see somebody else doing something wrong, we saw this before, think about your own wrong. Think about what you get things wrong with. And he says, how cruel would it be to forbid people to want what they think is good for them? But if you get angry at their misbehavior over that, you lose your temper. It's because you're trying to prevent them from doing what they actually think they should do. Finally, the last thing I'm going to bring up from Marcus, he talks about something similar to what Epictetus was talking about. So we have names for how people are chronic screw ups, right? This person is a thief. They're gonna steal your stuff if it's not tied down. This person, they use the word adulterer. We'd be like, this person's always on the make. They're gonna try to seduce your spouse, try to seduce your, boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that. So he says that one of the things that sometimes goes wrong with us is we attach the designator to a person and then we just view them that way, right? We treat them as if they're only a thief, only an adulterer. We don't treat them as an individual, and we also don't think about what can we bring to the table. What he says, think about what virtue would allow you to deal productively with this. So, your friend is suggesting that you stay out late on a night when you should be studying and go out and party. You could get pissed off with them and be like, "Oh, I can't believe that you don't care about me and my grades," or whatever, right? Or you could also just exercise temperance. You can exercise wisdom and justice and courage. So you can also ask yourself, and this is a useful practice, why didn't you reasonably expect that person who has weaknesses that you know about to go wrong? Why would you expect them to be better than they actually are? They are the way they are. They might be better in the future, but they're not going to get any better with you yelling at them or punishing them or punching them out or anything like that, right? All right. So Bianca says, when getting overwhelmed with any kind of emotion, reason isn't possible at that moment. So that's the interesting thing. Seneca says that, and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius don't think that's the case. They think that when you are overwhelmed with an emotion, whether it's anger or grief, or even being too elated about something that you're going to have a come down afterwards, Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius think, against Seneca, that you can actually work with yourself. You can reason at that moment. It's difficult, but it's certainly possible to do. So, any other questions, comments, ideas? We got some time. Um, Next, by the way, the next one is going to be going back to the Platonic tradition, and we're going to be looking at a contemporary of Epictetus, Plutarch, because Plutarch actually has a whole book on controlling anger, which is really quite interesting. There's some overlap with the Stoics, some differences with the Stoics as well. All right, so Hobbit says, what would be the Stoic attitude toward to my anger towards my friend for his eating habits, specifically dog meat? I understand this is part of his culture, but it's too uncomfortable for me. So, I mean, it wouldn't be a Stoic attitude so much. It would be like, what would the Stoics say? And one would be, I mean, how is it your business what he's eating? Is it because you're concerned about the cruelty that's involved in butchering and procuring dogs? I mean, if that's really what it's about, then you probably should be equally angry at any friend or yourself for eating, unless it's totally organic, pork or beef, or consuming milk or chicken or any of these other things, because factory farming is pretty horrific across the board. So, what is so different about dog in this case? But why are you so concerned with your friend's eating habits anyway? What is you want to ask? What is that all about? So I think that's probably what Stoics might bring up. Um, James Bond, emotions to me are more like advisors versus dictators. Well, that's great. Then you're probably well off when it comes to emotions. I don't think that most of us are like that. We certainly don't start out like that. And it takes, getting lucky with your upbringing, or, a good bit of work to make that happen. So, I would say, um, congratulations to you. Now, from a Stoic perspective, not all of our emotions would be good advisors. Anger, envy, greed, things like that, probably not going to be that helpful for you. All right. Pop killer Aurelius wrote, as an emperor, we're civilians in essence. How does one who's not an emperor live with justice and deal with injustice? Does it only path for virtue only? I'm not sure what that last one means. But so Aurelius wrote as an emperor. Aurelius wrote as a person who happened to be emperor, who's like the rest of us. I mean, you just heard me say that Aurelius is like, remind yourself that you're like all the rest of these poor bastards who screw up, right? So it doesn't matter whether you're an emperor or a civilian, or in the military, or because civilian is not opposed to emperor, but rather to military or police or something like that. It's the same principles that would apply. Doesn't matter whether you're a child or a parent or a brother or sister, or a boss or an employee. All of these things would still be applicable. So I'm not sure. I mean, living with justice and dealing with injustice, we all face injustice, including our own, and we all have the opportunity to live with justice. It looks different in different cases. Like, I don't have to run the country, thank God, because if I did, I probably would screw it up. And it probably wouldn't be great for people, but I have the things I'm responsible for where I can act with justice. I can act with justice towards my neighbors and colleagues and my kids, my siblings, my wife, all sorts of people, right? So justice is it's not something just at the highest level. Everybody can act with justice. Um, All right. James Bond says, yeah, years of lots of inner work practices, not born this way. Yeah. So that's good. And that's one of the promises of philosophy understood as a way of life. You know, that's the way ancients thought of philosophy. It's not just about writing and reading books and having, cool metaphysical discussions. It's also about like figuring out what really matters and then figuring out how to orient yourself in that way. All right, Pop Killer says pave the way for virtue. I had a brain fart. So does it only pave the way for virtue? Well, justice is one of the virtues. So, and actually the Stoics, with each of those four cardinal virtues, they break them down into a whole bunch of sub virtues. So, for example, where Marcus is talking about kindness, that's a part of justice for the Stoics, benevolence to other people. Courage has, like 5 or 6 sub parts to it. Wisdom, a whole bunch as well. So, yeah. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, I'm both working on a book on that topic, the cardinal virtues as the Stoics understand them, and I teach courses on it. I'll be offering a 8-week online course on it later on, probably in the summer or early summer, late spring, in the Study with Sadler Academy. Austin says, have we already covered righteous anger, thumos? I'm really interested in this concept vis-a-vis injustice is duty. Yeah, so thumos, we've talked about quite a bit more in the stuff about Plato and Aristotle. You notice that this is session 15. And also in the stuff on Homer and Hesiod and Greek tragedy. Yeah, so we've already, if you go to the playlist, we've already covered a lot of that. Righteous anger doesn't exist from a Stoic perspective. There is no anger that's good according to the Stoics. I actually avoid the term righteous anger because I find that in our current culture, too many people latch on to that and they don't bring in the heavy hitter tools like Aristotle's asking about, well, what would actually make your anger? He doesn't say righteous, he would say virtuous. What would make it virtuous? You got to be angry to the right amount, for the right reasons, at the right people, at the right time, expressed in the right way. These are just some of those qualifications, right? So, yeah. We're going to come back to that when we get to Plutarch and some of these other thinkers, because not everybody buys the Stoic line, right? Bianca says that's what I like about Stoicism. Okay, so this is actually a good point about not just Stoicism, but from about philosophies as ways of life in general, or philosophies as modes of intentional living. They are ongoing processes. I want to improve myself, being a good person, and from the mistakes I make are the things I can do better in the future. So all of them, Platonist, Aristotelian, Epicurean, Stoic, early Christian engagements with these, they're all about figuring out, why are we so damn screwed up, right? So you start out and start studying any one of these paths, and if you're being honest with yourself, pretty quickly you're like, oh man, here's this ideal. I don't measure up to this at all. I really do screw things up quite often. How do I fix this? How do I get myself on the right track? And it's not like there's a switch you can flip. It's like, oh, there's habits that I got to break and assumptions I got to question. But over time, like you said, it's an ongoing process. It's cumulative, right? And I'll also say too, it works better if you do it with other people, if you're not just trying to do it totally on your own, right? Here's a good point. Oh, yeah, also Bianca says, I learned from the mistakes I made, missed a bit in my text. Let's and Philosopheric follows up on that. Beat me to it. Was about to make a similar point about philosophy at large, right? Okay, so Attila says, is anger to be avoided in all cases? There are no virtuous applications of anger, according to Aristotle. No, there are. We're not talking about Aristotle here because we're talking about the Stoics, right? The Stoics say that there is no good anger. Aristotle, Plato, the Epicureans, they say there is good anger, but it's pretty rare and it's subject to a lot of different constraints, So it's not like they're like, hey, be as angry as you like or anything like that, right? Bianca says, philosophy in general, indeed. The more I read, the more philosophies I want to study. Yeah, and I certainly know that feeling. I've been in the philosophy game now for 35 years of my 54 years being alive. And you know, there's a sort of despair that comes with that at certain points. You're like, oh crap, I can't possibly read all this stuff. Like I would walk into my university library and we had like a, shelf after shelf after shelf of philosophy books. And I'd be like, I can't even read all the stuff on this shelf in my lifetime. How am I ever going to get on top of this? And then at a certain point, you're like, well, you don't have to be. None of us have to be. And I've got some like quick takes videos out there about this, providing advice. None of us have to like read everything. We just got to find some stuff that we actually resonate with, that works for us. And that's good. That's great. And, you may be in a phase for a while. Like I went through a Nietzschean phase and a Jean-Paul Sartre phase and a Wittgenstein phase and a Thomas Aquinas phase, where I was like, they've got it all figured out, right? I want to read everything they ever wrote and think through them. And then after a certain point, maybe you stay in them, or maybe you're like, I like something else over here. I'm now what you call a Ciceronian eclectic, where I take a couple main, approaches and kind of blend them together as best as I can. And I think that's perfectly fine to do, So, all right. Any other questions, comments about anger, Stoics, especially Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, some of the principles that we've talked about? Not seeing any yet. So let me again say that next month, we'll be doing Plutarch on his work on controlling anger, which is really quite good. Okay, so Austin says, I'd love to know how anger played a role or not in Marcus's politics. As little as possible, right? But a better person to ask that to would be like Donald Robertson, right? Who's much more into the biography of Marcus. I don't spend a lot of time on that sort of thing. I'm more about what is the person actually saying. So he would be a better person to ask about that. And he actually, he's got a book called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, which and he's also got that nice graphic novel, Verissimus, which he did with what was that artist? I think he's a Spanish guy, where he's obviously it's not all of Marcus's life, but he's depicting a lot of stuff. And Marcus put up with a lot of BS in his time. So yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments, confusions, worries, concerns? Otherwise, we'll probably call it a day. I'll get back to my work. Pop Killer. What time do you stream? I caught the tail end of this. I live in the UK. Super easy to find by following me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, going into my YouTube channel. That's sort of a question you can easily answer for yourself ahead of time just by looking at when the things are scheduled. Typically, I'm about 6 hours off of the UK, and many of my events are at noon my time, which would be 6 o'clock your time, but some are at 2 o'clock and some are at other times. So the best thing is always just to, like follow the social media or go to the YouTube channel. You scroll down and you see the upcoming live streams. Global, like, subscribe, share. Yeah, I usually don't, I'm not one of those people in YouTube and social media who's like, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, you know. Um, I probably should be if I wanted to be more successful, but it feels a little like pandering to me, so I don't do it too much. Um, Philosophisk, I'm glad I caught this. Always good to stretch the brain muscle. We'll try to keep tuning in. Thanks, Doc. Yeah, and I mean, it couldn't hurt to go and spend some time, either before or after we're gonna do these sessions to look at the people that we're talking about. James Bond, want to extend my appreciation for the work you've put out there years ago on YouTube. Was instrumental in my growth, development, and shaping what's salient. Well, that's awesome to read. I will say that I don't do a lot of what you could call original content. So, you can thank me, but, be grateful to Plato and Aristotle and the Stoics and the people that I explain, because if it wasn't for them, right, I wouldn't have much to do on YouTube. That's basically what I do, is take other people's complicated thoughts and try to make them more accessible, right? Bianca, I love talking about philosophy. My husband thinks I talk about it too much. Yeah, I mean, that can be an occupational hazard. Um, I'm fortunate in that I have a wife who also is very interested in philosophy, but she can get a little sick of some of the things that I'm talking about if I get too obsessive about them. But I kind of lucked out in that respect. All right, so I think I'll wrap it up here. Thanks to everybody for joining in and for your questions and comments. And we do these every month. You can, like I said, check the YouTube channel or Facebook, other places where I post about what we'll be doing next month, Plutarch, and then we're going to do some other ancient thinkers. And then before too long, we're going to start making our way into the early Middle Ages and looking at treatments of anger. Although we do need to go back and look at some Hebrew scriptures and ancient Jewish Neoplatonist stuff as well, with like Philo of Alexandria. So, all right, I will see you all down the line, and check out the calendar in the channel or on Facebook, or even in my Reason IO events calendar, to keep on top of what's coming up. And I will see you next time.